And we're back for part three. If you haven't seen parts one and two, we've been talking about how Dolores from Disney Encanto may or may not actually have super hearing. So we're diving into the physics behind that, and we're in part three now, so spoiler alert. So Dolores supposedly has super hearing. The first two videos in this series kind of challenged that a little bit, but we're going to dig into it, and we're finally going to talk about Bruno. Bruno is kind of the key to the next part of this video because in Dolores' part of the song, we don't talk about Bruno. She associates him with sand, and not just sand, the sound of falling sand. So to get into the next part of her gift, we really need to explore how loud is falling sand. Is that something that you could hear with normal hearing, or is that something that you would need super hearing in order to be able to hear? So I went out and actually got some sand and made some recordings, and this is what we found. So falling sand has an approximate sound level of 50 dBSPL. But it's not really just the falling sand, right? The sand in Bruno's tower is falling, but it's behind this closed door that is kind of forbidden for people to go behind. So Dolores, at best, is standing in front of the door, listening to the sound through the door. And so we really need to talk about this new concept called a sound transmission class, or an estimate or a rating of how much sound is lost as sound travels through different objects. And there are ratings for all sorts of different materials. I looked up on a website that I'll link down below a guesstimate at the sound transmission loss in the sound transmission class of a solid wood door, and they estimated it at about 40. And it changes with different frequencies and stuff, but the main gist is if you put a 50 dB sound in, like falling sand, and it has to pass through a solid wood door, it would lose about 40 dB in that process. So the sound that Dolores would actually be hearing of that falling sound would be about 10 dB, which is a very quiet sound. And when I made the measurement of the sand was being poured very close to the microphone. So really we have to take into account the fact that the sound has to travel to the door and then go through the door, which brings up the inverse square law from video one. And really with some estimates of the inverse square law and factoring in a little bit that some of the sound might be retained in the medium because of the reflection of the cavernous walls, I estimated that it would lose about 48 dB in traveling from the sound that's falling to the door. So we're left with a sound that's about 2 dB at the door, and then it has to go through the door, losing another 40 dB, leading it to be negative 38 dB, and you definitely need super hearing to hear a sound at minus 38 dB. 0 dB would be like the softest sound that someone could hear. So minus 38 is really, really quiet sound. So minus 38 dB, not audible unless you have super hearing. I mean, there's no way that you could hear a sound that's that quiet. And this doesn't even factor in all of it. I've got this theory going on. The sound of falling sand coming from Bruno's tower is a constant, steady stream of sand falling from the top of the cave down to the bottom of that entrance point. So that would be a constant sound like shh. But when we hear Dolores sing in the song, we actually learn that the sound of falling sand that she associates with Bruno is a ch, ch, ch. But what it could be is Bruno throwing salt and pepper, which would sound a lot like sand. But as he's throwing that, it would make a little ch sound as it hit the ground. And if Dolores' hearing was sensitive enough, she could hear that. So did I make some recordings of sound going? Of course I did. And the sound there is even 10 dB quieter than the constant stream of falling sand. So if she couldn't hear it at minus 38, of course she's not going to hear it at minus 48. So far in the first video, we learned that you don't need super hearing to hear a chorus from a mile away. The second video showed us that you don't need super hearing to hear the sound of a pin dropping, but we finally have some evidence that Dolores has super hearing because there's no way, either through Bruno's door or hearing him throw the salt and sugar over his shoulder as he walks around the house, there's no way that she would hear that without some sort of super hearing. Now, the counter to this is that she could just be associating him with the sound of falling sand. She was probably old enough to have known Bruno and have gone into his tower and seen the falling sand before his door got all boarded up. So she might associate him with the sound of falling sand without actually being able to hear it. We're going to dive into one more thing that people keep bringing up, which is what about at the meal where she hears Mariano from miles away? And I've got an interesting explanation for that I'd love to hear your comments on. Stay tuned. We'll see you next time.